how did you write this particular song? And how do you write songs in general? Tell us about that.
Well, this song is about my tragic love life. As I move around so much that I haven't really had a chance to settle down, so I'm always looking. And I got so desperate and so lonely that I actually went on the internet and tried to find a lover. And the first name of this song was Craigslist Disaster. But I changed it to OK Cupid because it sounded more positive. And so I just wrote the truth of what the guys wrote to me when I put my picture there and what I wrote back.
No, I'm kind of stunned. Now, you got on one of these sites, and tell us what your nickname was on this one. No, never mind. That's not our business. You're a girl who I'm going to back up a little bit and say, tell us a little bit about your origin. You have an accordion in your hands.
I do.
Did you ever play Zydeco?
I do, yeah. I sure do. I'm from one of the original 17 Cajun families in North America.
Is that right?
We were sent here by Louis XIII, and I'm descended from his drummer, whose name was Jacques Legere.
From Louis XIII's drummer?
Yes.
Did they have drums in France?
They were used in the military, and they were used to inspire young men to march into all kinds of dangerous situations and leave it to a Legere not to carry a gun, but to carry a drum.
Yeah, so that came down through, you have that in your DNA, apparently.
I got it.
Yeah. Tell just a little bit about Zydeco. Tell us a little bit about the beginning of Zydeco and how that is.
Oh, thanks for asking. Well, you know, there was a time when the French had a big piece of territory called North America, and we were on the top. And Louis XIV was very, very powerful, and so he sent a bunch of us here, and then the English got a hold of some technology, and then they were the #1 superpower. And so they took all the little Cajuns, including the Legeres, and they said, get out of here. They were on Nova Scotia, if you know where that is. And we walked, most of us walked to Louisiana. Once we got there, we invented American music because we put the original reels and jigs and all the little dances that were being done by Louis XIV together with the music of another forced migration, which is the people who came from West Africa as slaves. And we were also all part what's called Métis, which is we're all part Native American. So we put together Indian music and the music of the slaves and the French music of the French court, and that gave us the greatness of American music.
Well, let's hear some of that great music right now. Ladies and gentlemen, with OK Cupid, it's Phoebe Legere and the Prodigies.
Okay. Real story, folks. I posted a little photograph of myself all dressed in green. I wrote a few words on the profile, and I hoped you were looking for me. I wrote, I want to dance in France, and ride to the moon. I want to swim naked in a swimming pool, make love in a hot air balloon. Okay, Cupid, what's the use in waiting? Okay, Cupid, I'll try computer dating. He wrote, I like your smile, you look fun. I like your eyes, I love your tongue. Do you like women or men? Do you want to experiment? Are you religious or spiritual? Are you thin or fat? Are you vegetarian? Do you prefer dogs or cats? I said I want to dance in France, and like to ride to the moon. I want to swim naked in a swimming pool, make love in a hot air balloon. Okay, Cupid, what's the use in waiting? Okay, Cupid, I'll try computer dating. Come out and shine, the clouds are fine, spread your wings and glide. We'll be so happy, we'll rise like the moon and the tide. Unzip your loneliness, my dear, come out of your private hell. It's heaven when you're near me, we're so compatible. I said I want to dance in France, and ride your eyes to the ballroom. I want to swim naked in a swimming pool, make love in a hot air balloon. Okay, Cupid, what's the use in waiting? Okay, Cupid, I'll try computer dating. And so we made a date to meet for tea and scones. I texted back, yes, 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 yes. On my beautiful new iPhone. And when we finally met, I got a big surprise. It was my next door neighbor. The boy with the big blue eyes. He said, I want to dance in France, and like a ride to the moon. I want to swim naked in a swimming pool, make love in a hot air balloon. Modulate, okay, Cupid, what's the use in waiting? I'll take Cupid, I'll try computer, go for it.
When you read things in these articles about you being one of the it girls,
Who said that?
it's in there. It's several spots. How do you define for the camera? How do you define that? That was sort of a '80s tag, and did you feel like that was you? You were an it girl?
What a good question. Well, first of all, for some reason, the 80s has attached to itself to me. I think it was just a mistake of some journalist, and it kept getting picked up. Or maybe it's just the natural desire of some humans to diminish women by putting a certain chronology on them. But really, my first record came out in 1994. I opened for David Bowie on his national tour in 1992, and I was the star of some movies that were called the Toxic Avengers series, but I was not in the first one, which is in the 80s. I was in the Toxic Avenger 2 and 3 that both came out in the 90s, and I had a string of movies and hit records in the 90s. So I think of myself as a 90s person, and I felt that I was a total unknown, far from being it. I was nothing in the 80s, and perhaps became it only by chance. It's interesting, Greg, I'm sure you've noticed that as humans, we all like to kind of glom onto one person for a short period of time, especially a girl. We'll all kind of be in love with one girl for a little while, Kim Kardashian, I mean, you fill in it's always different, Marilyn Monroe, whoever it is. And we all put her on a pedestal, and we can worship her like a queen for maybe a year or two. Paris Hilton, do you remember her? Very interesting person, very intelligent, nice person. And then when we're done with that, we knock her off the pedestal, generally discredit her in some way, that she's either stupid or has been overexposed. Oh, Farrah Fawcett was when I was a little girl, Farrah Fawcett. Mm-hmm. Well, yes, very often people are just famous for hair. Yeah. And I always had good hair, so it was probably because I'm part Native American, so I have good hair. And probably that was the reason that I was it, and nothing more.
You mentioned a couple of names which are part of your biography. You were cabaret piano player,
Yeah.
singer, David Bowie, all of a sudden sees you in connection. How did that story come about?
Oh, Greg, what a good question. I did a lot of English television. As you know, people in England are very verbal. They like to talk. And they put a lot of energy into creating their sentences and expressing themselves. So I enjoyed doing English television. Bowie was watching, and he called me up. Bowie liked talent. I liked talent too. He also, before he became a rock star, he really wanted to be a cabaret singer. That's what he really wanted. He was a very serious and intelligent guy, and he loved the piano, and he loved that texture of Kurt Weill songs and the Great American Songbook. A great admirer of the real American song tradition. So he saw me playing the piano, one of my own songs. You can see the performance that he saw on YouTube. If you do a search for Terry Wogan. I was on the Terry Wogan show, and I was playing a white grand piano and wearing a costume that I designed, because I obviously was always economizing. I'm not like a real star that can have real costumes, so I would sew my own costumes and I would paint my paintings on them. And he was very interested, I think, in this obvious creativity. Because he was very creative, loved the arts. And he called me up. I was sitting in my apartment in New York City playing the piano. He said, "Would you like to open for me on my national tour?" And at that time, I was not a David Bowie fanatic, because he was putting out dance records at that period. And I thought he was a sellout. I wasn't really aware of the early work. It was so brilliant, so inventive. Of course, he wanted to be a star in America, as everyone does. If you want to be a star in America, you have to surf the lowest common denominator in some way. And of course, at that time, 89, I guess, is when he saw me, and then we start to talk around 90, in the 90s. He had put out a bunch of dance records that I thought were less than fascinating. Always had a great look. So I thought it was too superficial for me. But then as I did my research, I realized what a very important cultural figure he is. And of course now since his death, he's almost achieved a Christian status. He's almost a supernatural thing about David. But he was just a human being with all the divinity that is in a really intelligent, really creative human being.
So he convinces you were relatively probably unknown at the time?
Completely unknown.
And he asked you to open up, and did you have a band at the time?
Well, he wanted me to play solo. He would put a white grand piano, exactly as he had seen me on English television. He would put a white grand piano on a forklift, and it would come up onto the stage, and then I would walk out in one of these costumes that I would sew by hand all night long, and I would face 20,000 people. And the sound of 20,000 people clapping is something that you never forget. It's a beautiful sound. I'm not saying that facetiously. It's that whenever human beings do something together, it has tremendous power. Well, you heard that last night on Ken's show when we all clap in rhythm. It's just a great sound.
So when you got done with that, did you have to pinch yourself, or did you realize this was just another step, another chapter in your book?
I never looked too far ahead. I learned a lot about show business from David. about the nuts and bolts of having a really big band on the road. He traveled with, of course, a complete sound system, a big luxury bus. Adrian Ballou was his guitar player. Very, very fine guitar player, and we're still in touch. We hope to play together. Very creative. Bowie always surrounded himself with deep, interesting musicians. And I was able to watch David about 20 times live, the whole show. So that was an education. His attention to gesture, his economy on stage, his self-control. That's one of the reasons he was so attractive, is that dignified self-containment. He learned that. You can see him young on YouTube. You can see him young before he became David Bowie.
Yeah. Did he critique you at all, or come in and comment on you? I should say critique in a positive sense. Did he come into the dressing room at the time and say, hey, good, bad, or indifferent?
The first time that he came into my dressing room, I almost fainted. I actually started to fall backwards. It's never happened to me before. I've traveled the world and I've seen a lot of beautiful people. You're very handsome, Greg. I've seen gorgeous people. I mean, you see them, right? But he was really handsome, much more so than in photographs. It's extraordinary. And I actually lost consciousness and started to fall backwards. Luckily, my friend was standing behind me, and she just put her hands out like this and pushed me back up. I caught my breath, and we began to talk. When David would come to talk with me, he would always say pretty much the same thing in different interesting ways. And it was, he thought that I was best just playing the piano and singing. He said that he didn't think I should get involved with rock and roll or pop music. You didn't even hear me play the piano last night.
Yeah, I saw it on YouTube, but yeah.
Which is that's my number one instrument. Everyone has one instrument with which they feel most affinity. I say I'm married to the piano, but it's just too hard to carry it around to a place like this. It wouldn't have worked. It's not Americana. There's even some feeling in parts of the Southwest that that's something, like rich people in the East do. But I play classical music, but I also play honky-tonk piano and blues piano. I love to play New Orleans style. So when I'm in New Orleans, they still have pianos there, and I play them there, and I love that instrument and spend a lot of every day playing it. I often compose on the piano. But as you see, I also play the guitar and the accordion and the cello and a lot of Native American instruments. I didn't get a chance to go into those dimensions last night, because it was a short show. But David Bowie felt that was how I was best. I think that when we admire another person, very often it's because they're doing something that we wish that we could do. And I think he would have liked, at least in some magic moment, to have been a woman in a beautiful evening gown, playing a beautiful song and singing at the piano. That was something very elegant to him.
And he encouraged you to do that?
He paid for that piano to go out on that, I don't know what that must have cost, to put it up on the forklift, put it down on the stage, and then lift it up and pack it up and put it in the truck. That probably added $3,000 to each date.
Wow.
He liked it.
I saw on one of your YouTube pieces, many on YouTube, but last night was you playing Summertime.
It's on Italian television.
Oh, is that it?
I was very lucky, because if you're not a big star, it's very hard to get good video of yourself. It's still a very expensive art form. We can all make videos on our iPhones, but to do it right, that was just amazing. That somebody called me up, they flew me to Italy, and there are several other moments from that show on YouTube. One in which I come in a silver ball from the ceiling, and it's the real Italian presentation of the woman as a kind of Madonna, angelic figure of magic. I come from the ceiling and there's tinkling bells as I come down in this silver glittering ball. The petals of the ball open, and I'm standing there wearing a dress that they got from the Cinecittà costume collection. It had been worn in a Fellini film. Mm-hmm. And so that was, I just loved doing that. That was, that's sometime in the early 90s when they still did those huge Las Vegas productions on Italian television, all funded by the government.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. That was on Rai Uno, I believe. And Rai came several times to film me in different locations. Yeah, I was very lucky, because that's the thing about music and singing. You know, it really happens for a very brief time, and then you're dead. So now on YouTube we can see a lot of people who are dead, who are said to have been the greatest performers that ever lived. Sarah Bernhardt is there on YouTube, in George M. Cohan, who was filmed when he, later in life, he was well into middle age. Have you seen it?
No, I will now.
Oh, and if he was that good in middle age, I can't imagine how he was in his youth. Of course, all the greatest blues, it used to be very hard to see these people. Durante, you could see Durante when he was young. Piaf, young.
Well, you've done Edith Piaf many times.
I do a lot of it in my shows. Ken wanted only original music, and so I love that, because I'm a songwriter and I love to just do my own songs. But when I was learning to play the accordion and sing in French, I studied her repertoire very closely on records. My grandmother loved her, and I picked up a lot from Piaf. It's hard to say exactly what I got, but I think you could, she did not play the accordion. Of course, it adds a tremendous new layer of difficulty to play the accordion and hold something very heavy, play both hands, and sing with great emotion and gesture. It's not so easy. But what I learned was from that, what they call the chanson réaliste tradition, which is the French tradition of doing songs about the people, about the workers, the people of the street. These are songs about anti-heroes, songs about a clown, songs about a guy who goes to the French Foreign Legion, songs about a prostitute, songs about an accordion player who works in the bal musette, and a prostitute that falls in love with him. He goes to war, of course, World War I, and is killed, and then she's on the street. And so incredible story songs that bring you right to the pitch of the intensity of human grief and joy, I think you would say. Wouldn't you? What she was able to convey with her whole body. And she gave so much to art that she actually destroyed herself. Some performers give so much that they just burn right out.
Talk about burning right out. Mm-hmm. The story of Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah.
And your video, which I watched last night.
Did you?
A couple times.
Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah. Well, it's what prompted you to take on this subject and to take on really this whole audio-video song that you put together.
Yes.
This is great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was signed to Epic Records when I was 15. I was a street kid. I ran away from home. I lived on the street. And I was signed as a songwriter. And one night I lived in squats, and I still live in the same place. Squat is an illegal place to live, where it has been abandoned. And then eventually I got together with some people and we bought that squat for $1 from the city. And it cost us a lot more than that in legal fees, of course, as you're in real estate law. So you can imagine it wasn't so easy. It took years and years and years, but I still live there. And in a way, that's why I'm able to be an artist and take chances and do all the charity work I do. It's because I'm not spending $7,000 a month in rent, which is what you pay in New York. So I was asleep in my little bed in my tenement, and Marilyn Monroe came to me in a dream, and she was singing. Marilyn Monroe, Marilyn Monroe. And it combined with a childhood trauma that I had, where I was with my grandparents. It really happened. Is it me? Oh.
Okay. Sorry.
I loved my grandparents, Greg. I make no secret of this. I have always loved to listen to and learn from people of the older generation. I was very close with my grandmother. She was the grand groove. She was just the center of my universe. And they took me, my grandmother and grandfather took me swimming. I think we were off the coast of New Hampshire. There was a strong undertow, and I got caught in the undertow. I was very young. I don't even know if I could swim yet. Mm-hmm. Maybe 4 or 5, the time when things make a big impression on you. And my grandfather reached down and he picked me up out of this undertow. And it was very traumatic, and I could see through the water and I could see into the sky. It made a big impression on me. And that trauma, it's kind of, creativity is kind of interesting, because that's something that was lodged in my unconscious mind, in my hippocampus. So then many years later, I must have been in my teens, maybe it must have been, I was about 17, I saw on television Some Like It Hot. And I hadn't really ever studied Marilyn Monroe. I knew how talented she was supposed to be. I guess I'd seen some clips, but I had never watched a movie from beginning to end. Well, I was just knocked out. I could see it was a genius. And not only was it a genius, although genius is always metasexual, it always transcends gender. And that movie is also about gender fluidity. Right? It's a man who dresses as a woman, I think Tony Curtis, and they're in a band, they're in a traveling band, and she plays the ukulele and I can play the ukulele, my dad played it. So I just loved it. Gosh, I thought it was great. I went to bed that night and she was singing to me, and somehow, as dream logic works, I combined it with working out this trauma of almost drowning. I was swimming with my friend, Marilyn Monroe, when a wave swept me into its undertow. I was desperately fighting my way to the top, when all of a sudden time stopped. And that's really what happened when my grandfather picked me up. And then Marilyn Monroe. So I presented the song to my record company, Epic Records. And they were pretty dumb in those days, pretty dumb about music. They wanted music to be made by machines, and by this time they didn't want story songs, and they didn't want anything that had to do with dream logic or anything with more than 3 syllables. You know, they were really aggressively dumbing down American culture by this point. And I said to my record company president, I think that song's going to be a hit. And he said, no way, that sucks. And I said, I don't know, I just have a feeling in my gut that that's going to reach a lot of people. And indeed, after I was off Epic Records and I was on only independent labels, I put out that record myself. It was then picked up by a movie called Mondo, New York, And they did their best to exploit me, and as I say, they try to discredit and make everything. They kind of try to cartoon mass culture tries to sort of cartoon all of us in order to make us less potent. But nonetheless, that song became a hit on college radio. It has had over 1 million views on the YouTube.
1,000,001.
And people, wherever I go, people see me on the street, they recognize me, and they sing Marilyn Monroe. And the strange, eerie thing is that the way in which music is almost like a telescope to another dimension. And that song became a kind of interdimensional traveler. And Marilyn seems to have been able to project her image onto me, and in some of those shots of me in that video, I look like Marilyn Monroe. And as you can see, I don't look like Marilyn Monroe. It's like when you're walking down the street, and did you ever have the experience, Greg, of you see somebody and it looks just like somebody you know who passed away? Mm-hmm. There's Mike. And then you look, it doesn't look anything like, well, it's not Mike. So life is mysterious.
Speaking of mysterious, your paths crossed for a significant period of time with Hunter Thompson. And how did that connect? I mean, he's iconic, he's eclectic, he's everything, and you had a chance to be part of his world.
Someone called me to do a gig in Woody Creek. There was a bar called The Flying Dog. Now there's a beer, and you can see that the logo for Flying Dog beer was done by Ralph Steadman, who was the illustrator, of course, for many of Hunter's books, and very close to Hunter, extraordinary person. And so the Flying Dog had a piano, and I met a physicist who knew a physicist in Woody Creek, which is where Hunter lived. The physicist's name was George Stranahan from the Aspen Physics Institute. Mm-hmm. You can hear about some of my conversations with George Stranahan on a record called Blind Pursuits. It's called Conversations with George. I wanted to learn about physics. Mm-hmm. I wanted to learn more about new physics and the many dimensions and quantum physics. And George had a wonderful time with George. He had an enormous ranch. He owned 1,000 acres in the Rockies, which he's now gifted to the Conservancy, to the Nature Conservancy. Most extraordinary land, as you can imagine, in the Rockies. And he said, you know, Phoebe, the more I talk to you, the more there's somebody I'd like you to meet. I said, who's that? He said, Hunter Thompson. Well, you know, Hunter's great period of being the it boy was a little before my time. Actually, a lot. He's more associated with the 60s. And so I said, okay, sure, you know. And I walked into his kitchen in Woody Creek, and he was doing cocaine on the table. Now I don't drink, I don't take drugs, and so although I kind of come across as an outlaw musically, I'm actually a very conservative person in my habits, which is why I'm still alive. But Hunter was openly doing cocaine, and I listened to him talk, and I said to George, that's a shaman. I could see that he was connected to something very transcendental and very sublime. And of course, I'm always attracted to people with very high verbal ability. I had been very close friends with Terry Southern, who wrote Easy Rider, Dr. Strangelove, Candy, the best lines in Barbarella. And I'd been engaged to his son, Niall Southern. So I had been around people of very, very high intelligence and verbal ability. But Hunter had, in addition to this wonderful, measured eloquence, he had a sense of how to have fun. And very often this fun would take the form of very dangerous fun that involved explosions, gunplay, and very fast driving late at night, sometimes off-road in the Rockies, on motorcycles and in cars. So I was so fascinated, but it wasn't his sense of fun or his intelligence that made me fall in love. It was the sense that he gave, that I get from fewer and fewer people, in fact, the sense that he gave of being absolutely present in the moment with you, so that when I was with him, I did not feel alone. I think in modern life we do feel alone. We're there with our computer, and we seem to be there with somebody who's in the computer or who's on the YouTube, but we're not really there with them. But when you're with someone who is really there with you, really there in that moment, on planet Earth, for that tiny second that we enjoy here on this planet, it's something so precious. So I felt that with him, and he, every moment, we say in my tribe that every day is a holiday, every day is sacred. And it was like that with Hunter. Every day was a holiday.
I saw on YouTube kind of a staged event where Hunter acted as a minister.
Hunter was a minister. He was a minister.
Ordained minister.
Yes, yes.
You had this, you were dressed up as in gown and actually...
A bride, yeah.
Yeah, bride.
Yeah.
So what was this, how was that, how did that occur?
Yes. Well, it was I saw a bull named Turbo, and it was the most beautiful bull I had ever seen. I like bulls. I love them. I like cows, but I really I'm very attracted to certain animals. And I used to write for Ranger Rick, and I'm very interested the way people have certain animals that they just, wow, look at that sloth. That's great, you know. And you have cat people. You heard my song last night. Do you prefer cats or dogs? I find it very interesting that people have their animal. But I do love bulls. And I just went crazy for this bull. And I said to George Stranahan owned him. And they keep their bulls, they let them just roam in the Rockies all summer long. And then they herd them up and bring them back for the winter, the cows and the bulls. Of course, you have one bull for every 9 cows. Did you know that's what you have in free range beef?
Wow.
Yeah. And so this was a magnificent red bull. There's nothing like a red bull with the great big horns and a look on his face of such potent masculinity and power. And I said, because I was living with Hunter in a kind of just a world of the imagination, where anything's possible. I love that bull. I would like to marry that bull. That bull would make a good husband. I think we could get along just fine, and he'd go up all summer long in the Rockies and come back in the winter. And Hunter thought to himself for a while. He said, "You mean it?" I said, "Yes, and you're a minister. You could marry us." And that's how it started. And so they went. We got a lady cowboy, and you can see her who's holding Turbo. Now, Turbo was a very special bull. He was not only beautiful, but I speak in the past tense because, of course, he's no longer with us. But Turbo was $1 million bull. Just one vial of his sperm was $250,000.
Right word.
Yep. And he himself was worth $1 million. So the lady cowboy went up and got him. And I was only scared, well, bulls can kill you. And I was only scared because I was in that wedding gown. And so I was afraid I couldn't run. That was the problem. Mm-hmm. But I had a full wedding gown and a beautiful bouquet. And Hunter was wearing a cap of unborn wolf, from a wolf fetus. You can see him in this cap on the YouTube. And he had a wonderful time. He was wearing a Moroccan man's wedding dress.
Yeah.
I had written a special song for the occasion called The Hymen Feast, and you can hear it both as unplugged acoustic version and as a punk rock version. We have an electric version on YouTube too. And many people have asked for a logical explanation of this, what was clearly a work of art and religion at the same time. Of course, in the world of myth and Greek religion, there are examples of women marrying bulls, Io. And in Mithraism, which is the basis for Christianity, folks, go ahead, Wikipedia, Mithraism. It was the religion of the Roman army in the first 4 centuries after Christ. And Christianity is really just like a mask on Mithraism, and at the center of Mithraism is a bull.
Who would have known?
Well, you gotta scratch the surface sometimes. So this was a mixture of anthropology and biology and performance art and religion and myth and psychology. I've never been married. That's the closest I've ever come. But I felt like I went through I walked through a door. Mm-hmm. And that was some kind of rite of passage for me. And I was so honored that Hunter stood up and made it happen.
You were there with Hunter while alive. You were also there during the funeral, and you eulogized him.
Yes, I did. Yes, he loved to hear me sing in a Native American style. I didn't do that much of it last night. I just did some little touches of that kind of singing. But my native name is Song Bundle, and I know many songs and hymns from our group of tribes. I'm from the Abenaki tribe, but I also have Wampanoag blood and Mi'kmaq blood. These are all related tribes from the Algonquin Nation. So I'm a carrier of the songs and the traditions of our people. And I sang one of those. I sang a creation hymn.
I'm just reading on August 20th, 2005, in a private funeral, Thompson's ashes were fired from a cannon. This was accompanied by red and green fireworks, all to the tune of Norman Greenbaum's Spirit in the Sky and Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man.
He loved Bob.
Yeah.
Loved Bob. He was a very good friend of Bob and Joan Baez. They were very close. Well, you have to see Hunter in context. He is really part of the Beat generation, a little younger than the Beats, but was very close to Ginsberg very close to boroughs. And part of the San Francisco Renaissance of Kerouac, Ginsberg, Ferlinghetti, this flowering that happened around poetry in San Francisco. I guess it's really late 50s, early 60s. So Bob Dylan in his best years is very much a part of that crowd. And they were close. I love that song myself. And one of my old boyfriends plays bass for Bob Dylan.
No kidding. So the funeral, it was quoted at some place about $3 million, so it must have been a spectacle.
It was a spectacle. I don't like to talk too much about funerals.
Yeah.
I'd rather just... I really loved Hunter. I miss him terribly.
So you have done so much. I mean, do you ever pause and reflect when they talk about, even in Wikipedia, you Juilliard-educated composer, soprano, pianist, and accordionist, painter, poet, filmmaker. Wow. It's like that Frank Sinatra. I've been a puppet, a pauper, a pirate, a poet, a pawn, and a king. You know, you've done it all.
I love that song. That's life.
Yeah, that's life.
That's what it's called. That's a great song. I haven't done it all, Craig. No, I haven't done it all, but I do love the arts. And I seem to be what is called a multi-talented person. My parents were painters. My grandparents, very gifted musicians. And in order to get along with my grandparents and my parents, it's like somebody who's bilingual. And I had to learn how to talk both in the world of visual things and the world of music. So I was always looking for a way to combine the two. I did my thesis at Vassar in performance art because I thought that performance art might be a way of combining visuals and sound. This was something David Bowie and I had in common, being very interested in these visual traditions as well as music traditions. It's only in America that they're separated. When you travel to the third world, everybody makes their own costumes, does their own dances, tells their own stories, sings their own songs, paints their house in some extraordinary way, decorates their cow, and it's only in modern times that these art forms have been broken up. And I think it may even be a way that people have tried to diminish my gift. But, oh, well, she does all these things. How can she be very important? But, because people do like to diminish women so they can feel more important than they are. But when you look at Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci or any of the really creative people from the past, you will find that they've been multi-talented. For heaven's sakes, Louis XIV invented ballet. He was also an extraordinary engineer and political strategist, really invented diplomacy. So I don't think we should pathologize being multi-talented. It's not a disability. I think it's really part of being a complete person. And I see that in the art world there is beginning to be some appreciation of what's called multidisciplinary art. So I just recently came back from Yaddo, which is a very famous writers' colony, very storied writers' colony where Truman Capote and Sylvia Plath and the greatest writers in America have gone to Yaddo. It's a retreat. You go for 8 weeks and you're with the most talented young people in the world, and you all eat together. And it's extraordinary. And they called me multidisciplinary, and they gave me a $2 million studio with a piano and a place to paint. I did portraits of all of the artists that I met there. They're fantastic people. You can see them on my Instagram, which is Phoebe Legere.
You wrote and starred in a play. I like the old stories of racing, and we're at Chautauqua Lake and speedboat racing.
Oh yeah.
Speed Queen.
Yes.
The Jo Carstairs.
The Jo Carstairs story.
Yeah. What drew you to her?
I read a book called The Queen of Whale Key. My sister has an island down in the Bahamas. And I was with my brother-in-law, and we like to go around on sailboat, and he pointed it out. He said, that's Whale Key, and we could visit there sometime. But I could see her house, what had been her house. And then I read the book. I began to learn more about her. Jo Carstairs was the motorboat racing champion of the world in 1926, 7, and 8. In those days, motorboat racing and, to some extent, car racing were hobbies of the very, very, very rich. And speed was the concept of speed, the notion of speed, was very modern and very exciting, and very much a part of the 20s, not only of people's desire to go fast, but even the art. The deco art will often have kind of wings that are elongated to depict this idea of forward motion, going into the future. That feeling that we had in America of optimism, that in the future everything would be possible, that the world would be much, much better. And so I saw Jo Carstairs as being a real icon of this a new kind of woman that is a kind of an action hero. She was kind of like an action hero. She'd been an ambulance driver in the 20s in World War I, so she had seen the most horrific violence. And it was necessary to drive the ambulance very fast. She was at the Battle of Verdun. She was not allowed to be a soldier. She was a very masculine person. She was like a guy. We all know women like that. And after the war, she had a fleet of limousines. All of the drivers were women. It was called Ex-Garage. And you can see me embodying this woman and her girlfriends. She was very rich. She inherited $500 million when she turned 21, and that was in 1921. She was born in 1900. So you can imagine what kind of wealth this was. She was the heir, really, to the fortune of the man who taught Rockefeller how to use fraud to control the oil business.
Standard Oil.
He really taught him how to do it. My sister's married into the Pratt family, and they were one of these oil. They started, of course, in whale oil, then kerosene, and then oil. And Rockefeller was like an octopus, and he said to these people, I'm going to put you out of business or come join me. And so he was able to consolidate everything. And so Jo Carstairs inherited that money and used it to live a life of freedom and fun that was completely modern and absolutely new. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Now in World War I, over 1 million boys died. In England, over 1 million died from France, about 2 million from Germany, and about 1 million from America. So boys were in short supply. And well, Jo Carstairs was happy to pick up the slack. She became a cross-dresser. She had her suits made on Savile Row. And I wore all Ralph Lauren beautiful suits, just getting as close as I could to Jo. She called herself Jo. Her real name was Betty Carstairs. She had 145 girlfriends, including Tallulah Bankhead, Marlene Dietrich, who was the biggest movie star in the world at that time, Greta Garbo, and a host of others. Including Oscar Wilde's niece, who was just like him. Her name was Dolly Wilde. Same insane verbal ability, that way with words that Oscar Wilde had, and totally gay. And another woman who is not very well known, but she's on the YouTube, you can see it with your own eyes. Her name was Nathalie Barney. She was a poet, a multimillionaires, and she had a salon just like Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas's salon, but her salon was for female writers. That's why you haven't heard of her. You see, Gertrude was nurturing Hemingway and the male writers, but Nathalie Barney was encouraging female writers. This was completely, female artists. This was a completely new concept. And Jo was part of this salon because in order to become a great artist, you must have great artists around you. You must have a milieu. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of a milieu. So in about 1930, the atmosphere began to change in England. There was a great time of tolerance for gender fluidity, and okay, if you want to dress like a girl, go ahead. If you want to dress like a boy, that's okay. Sort of like here, now. It's okay, you want to be gay, that's all right. And then suddenly, in about 1930, fascism arose everywhere. Everywhere, not just Germany, but everywhere. It started, this kind of clamping down on freedom, and gender freedom was one of them, right? It's the Weimar, there's this flowering of the human spirit, the Weimar, the beautiful, Hemingway wrote a book called A Movable Feast about these years in the 20s in Paris. Oh, what heaven to be young in those days, somebody said. And Jo said, all right, she started to win these motorboat races. She built her own boats. She raced herself. You can see Jo Carstairs racing and talking about her boats on the YouTube. Do yourself a favor, check it out. And then suddenly they began to write about her saying, oh, she acts like a boy, she chews gum, we hear she even smokes and swears and spits. And Jo said, I've had enough of this bad publicity. Because this happens when you start to get famous. When you're the it girl. They then try to pull you down. And she bought her own island in the Bahamas, Whale Key, 9 miles long. And she created her own kingdom there. And she was the king. She had her own army. And Marlene Dietrich would come to visit her on her 81-foot yacht, which was called the Mise en Scène. And I thought this is, so I played Tallulah Bankhead. I hadn't known much about her. That's obviously before my time. A fascinating person. Marlene, if Tallulah lived in these days, she would be a big politician or a great lawyer. And I played Marlena. And I just told the story of this life, the romance and the grief of this not only gay woman, but I think we would have to say, like, if she lived in these days, she would be transgendered. Yeah, Jo Carstairs. That was a great challenge because you can see that I don't really look like a boy. I don't say that facetiously, but I'm not one of those women that can pass easily as a boy. I have to try.
What's next for you? You're amazing. This has been so much fun.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for spending time with me. And you know what they said over there? Some people said, boy, that Greg, he is an incredible conversationalist. I hope you could get a word in edgewise. He says he's so fascinating just to hear him talk, and you haven't talked at all.
We're here to listen to you. When you hear things like this, as they were plugging you, a charismatic showman who works the
let me
audience
see.
with the razor-edged skill of a veteran comic, poking, teasing, and caressing it with clever turns of phrase, both musical and verbal. She brings to her vocal delivery a 4.5 octave range and an extraordinary palette of tonal color, and meticulous phrasing, says the New York Times.
That's the New York Times. Let me see that.
At the bottom of it. You may have that. You may have that, yeah.
There it is. There's the ink.
Yeah.
And there I am in my studio in New York City.
Yep.
And there are my paintings behind me. I took that picture myself. That's a selfie. Yeah, I set up the camera. Well, you know, that's the thing about music nowadays. If you can't do it yourself, you can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there a game plan? Do you have a 5-year, if you looked in a crystal ball and said, Phoebe Legere would like to do this?
Well, as you know, I have a nonprofit called the Foundation for New American Art. My game plan is to teach as much of what I have learned from my friendships with these very, very great personalities of our time, to teach it and impart it to the next generation. So my game plan is to nurture the visionary artists of tomorrow. Unfortunately, it's not happening in the schools. The rich kids are getting art and music. They're still being forced to play the piano. But very often the greatest artists come from the low income. Rembrandt, Michelangelo, Van Gogh was kind of lower middle class. Luckily he had some uncles who were art dealers. That's the only reason we've heard of him. But very often the artists come from the bottom layer, the bottom of the social ladder. This is traditionally true of musicians too. And so I believe that that art for a culture it's like this wellspring. It's if you think of it like the origin of drinking water. You know, it starts out as a little trickle and then it meets up with a river. That's like when you meet the other geniuses, and Hunter Thompson said the geniuses hold hands in a ring around the earth. And then it builds up into a mighty, like the Great Lakes would be maybe the 5 Finger Lakes. These would be like where your major artists, and then eventually a river will flow out into the ocean, which would be, of course, God. Mm-hmm. It's like God. So that would be a metaphor for the importance of the arts and music. The emphasis on STEM, well, I'm very interested in math and science. I'm fascinated. And I've done a lot of my avant-garde music has been based on science. I have an epic poem called The Common Root of All Organisms, which is about the way in which we all descend from a common mother. And I tell the story of who that mother was and how it happened and how we're all family. We're all related, we really are. And then I did one called Dark Energy, which is about that dark matter and the dark stuff. We just don't know what it is, but it's holding the whole earth together. And so I'm very interested in this, and especially the way in which science seems to, if you look at it in the right way, it seems to bear out what our Abenaki elders always said about the creation of the earth and who's running the show. And if we had more time, I could tell you about some of those parallels between Darwinian evolution and Abenaki creation myths, but I touch on them in that epic poem, which I sing, and you can hear it on the YouTube, or buy it on Einstein Records. It's called The Common Root of All Organisms. So I want to have the ability to teach what I know to the little children. I've chosen middle school as my age that I serve. 8 to 12. And so in the next 5 years, I'm hoping to be able to fundraise enough to take my program first into the 5 boroughs of Manhattan. We have 8 million people and some very vulnerable, dangerous populations. And then I know you have a program like mine here in Jamestown. I heard about it. Mm-hmm. And so I want to support everyone who's doing the same work that I am. And then I want to expand into other states and into other countries and be an ambassador for, you know, people talk a lot about the fact that we're living in a post-human era. We've all become part machine. I'm looking at you, a very brilliant man, obviously, with wearing headphones, with your machine here that's going to remember me forever and perhaps could even survive my death and be seen in 50 years. Hi, folks. Hi, folks of the future. I want to speak for the values that I think are important. The values of beauty, conversation, truth, respect for the environment. I suppose you'd say I have Native American values, but also I carry the values of coming from a farm family and a very religious family and a family where the most important thing was not to get rich and feel important. The most important thing was to take care of other people, including the sick, the old, and the children. Now, my voice is being drowned out by the voice of big media and the electronically amplified voices of people who have a very different message. But I'm the voice crying in the wilderness. That's my 5-year plan.
A great 5-year plan, and I'm just glad that your current plan included Jamestown, New York, and Ken Hartley's program, which led to us having a chance to chat today.
Well, I'll say as a closer, do I get a closer?
You get a closer.
I don't know if you're aware that I ran for governor of New York State in 2006. Oh. And I gave my I was endorsed. I'm not too proud of it, but I was endorsed among other people who endorsed me by the NRA because I said I think every woman should have a gun, know how to use it. Of course, I live in rural Maine. I have a gun, I know how to use it. I'm heavily armed at all times. And I think that's one of the reasons Hunter liked me. But you know, I live, not only do I live 25 miles from the nearest town, but I live a mile from the nearest road. And so it's very, very important for people to be able to protect themselves, either with guns or even if you study Krav Maga with a knife, you could do a lot of damage to the soft tissues. But you gotta be ready, girls. So in closing, I'd say that in running for governor of New York State, I drove all over this state, mostly from top to bottom, mostly, up and down that Hudson. And then I developed a huge, sincere respect and love for New York State. For the water, for the mountains, for the history, for the diversity of the people, for what it represents to folks all over the world. You tell people you're from New York that, oh, you're from New York. It's my dream to go there. All over the world I hear this. We're the dream. And I met such good people. You know, in New York, of course, we're all Democrats. I was running for the Integrity Party. That was going to be the third party, and because we do have some problems with our two-party system. We got some problems. And I had not at that time really spent much time in Western New York. And even to some extent, it seemed a bit forbidding because the Six Nations, the Iroquois, the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, their culture is so strong, such a high civilization, powerful mythology, powerful politics, powerful matrilineal system. I was a little intimidated as an Abenaki because that was the other football team, you know. We're the Algonquin Nation on the northeast coast, and you had these guys out in western New York, and I was a little intimidated by the language and just this extraordinary tradition and culture. And of course they got gorgeous men, you know, fantastic looking people. So I hadn't spent too much time here, but one thing led to another. I met some people in Ithaca, and then I met some people in Rochester, and I realized that this is the vibrant musical culture. You know, they've just voted Rochester one of the top 7 music towns in America, right after Austin and Nashville. It's because they have so many great music schools, but also it's the people. It's the people who are saying, we want music. We want to go hear live music. We appreciate it. We love our musicians. You know, that's gone pretty much in New York City. New York City is just about money now. Mm-hmm. And so I began to travel more often, and I met these wonderful crawdaddies. Nice, truly nice people. Dedicated, family men, good men. The guy who was my percussionist last night was the letter carrier, the postman in Rochester. That's how I found him. I sent him a video, and you can see it on my website, phoebelegere.com. You can see me playing with Dave. He's wearing a kind of a Tin Man mask. And I sent him a video of me playing. I'm going to sit right down and write myself a letter. And you can see us playing it together. And I had never met him. I cut it together with one of his videos that I found. And I said, would you play with me? And he introduced me to his friends. You know, music is kind of a boys' club. So I was very, very blessed to meet these very nice and spiritual guys. And I think they sounded good last night. So even my run for governor didn't take me here, but life. You see, the Lord seems to put the people I need in my path. And one thing led to another, and here I am in Jamestown. I came in last night, drove in last night, never been here before. It was quite dark and snowing and raining. This morning I woke up out in what's that town? It's not Busty. It's Busti. I woke up in Busti, and there was most beautiful farm I ever saw with a beautiful lake, and I should just warmed my heart so much. And the reception we had last night, well, you know, you find if you try hard enough, you can find your people. And I've really found a wonderful new family here in Western New York. So that's my closer.
And a wonderful one it is, and we thank you so much, Phoebe. This is great. I'm thrilled you could join us and be part of our family for at least a few days.
Thank you, Greg, and thanks for this clip.
Lively geniuses like Phoebe Legere take us to new places with her infectious energy and her love of life. So now we'll take you to another place, jail. This is a traditional folk song thought to have been generated by prisoners in the American South, the Midnight Special. It's been done by Lead Belly, it's been done by Odetta, it's been done by Johnny Rivers, and Cisco Houston, Harry Belafonte, the Beatles, and lots more. A TV show is named after this song, the Midnight Special. Let the Midnight Special shine a light on me. Let the Midnight Special shine a light on me. Let the Midnight Special shine a light on me. Let the Midnight Special if you're ever in Houston, where you been to ride, you better not gamble, oh, you better not fight. Oh, the sheriff will grab you, boys are bringing you down. Next thing you know, boy, you're prison bound. Yeah, the midnight special, shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Yeah, well, you wake up in the morning, hear that word bell ring. You go marching to the table, see the same damn thing. Knife and fork on the table, ain't nothing in the pan. And if you say a word about it, you get in trouble with the man. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Go, bro.
She wears